Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics.
Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Carl Carlson.
And this is Fred Schenkelberg.
Hey, Fred.
Hey, Carl.
I've been getting lots of questions from my the Ask Carl a Question button on the Inside FMEA series. So I really appreciate when people take the time to ask thoughtful and meaningful questions. And it's just a joyful part of my day when I get to answer those and stay connected with what people are doing. And so I've got one that came in a few days ago on a gentleman who wrote about this. They bought a company that had the plant equipment stored for a number of years. And then they're trying to ramp up with this plant equipment to get it working. And I won't mention names of the company or that type of thing, but just the scenario. It's just a fascinating subject of here you are. You don't have all the history of the equipment. You don't have the like failure history, that type of thing, or even the specifications, other than what you can get from equipment manuals that happen to be there.
Do you know if there was do you know if there was a spares storeroom or stockroom or?
I don't know.
Okay.
Didn't mention that in the question.
Yeah, because that would be the first place to go look. It's like, but it's kind of the dilemma is the spare parts that are here are the ones we're not using, or are those the ones we expect to use?
Yes, exactly.
So it still leaves you in a dilemma.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And of course, the question was FMEA related because it came in off the FMEA series, and with the should we be doing a process FMEA or what should we be doing, because we're spending most of our time fixing equipment and with lots of downtime, and they're trying to ramp up production. And so I thought that's an interesting question, and I dove into it and advocated that they first of all they would need to document their processes. In other words, they have to have a process flow diagram of some kind. So step 1, step 2, etc.
Right.
And then I think it's useful, no matter whether you're ramping up a new production or an old line, to prioritize. So if you have 100 process steps, all 100 are not equal. Some of them, because he's been going for about a year, so some of them may be not having a problem, and other ones are, or some of them have
serious problems. When it goes down, it takes you 6 weeks to get a part.
Exactly.
So that kind of stuff.
Severity, yep. So prioritizing steps so you don't necessarily do a PFMEA on all the processes. And I like to prioritize at least the high, medium, low. And if you have lots of time, you can do all of them. But you want to start with the high priority.
Well, I imagine that if you even just do the high level part, and it pretty quickly a team could say, all right, we got to prioritize on this, and this piece of equipment. And then that'll keep them busy for a long time to get it going. And then as the trouble is that you still got, let's say it's a Pareto of equipment causes of failures, right? The hard part with old equipment is that our knowledge of bringing up new equipment or running existing maintained equipment it's a whole different set of risks and different things that fail, and for different reasons. Just the corrosion itself can get into so many places, assuming it's a mechanical systems. It's just different. I'd say do the PFMEA, but bring in some of these old, the graybeard type folks that have old plant equipment experience, because that's different. It's fundamentally different than bringing up regular equipment.
It is my mind is sifting through different methods, because when we're talking equipment, we want to talk maintenance and essentially reliability centered maintenance and supportability, that type of thing.
Right.
And so there's a body of knowledge in RCM now. At the core of RCM is a type of FMEA. It's a maintenance FMEA. Mm-hmm. But even an RCM procedure, whether you use Mowbray's book or other standards, SAE standards, you're going to prioritize which equipment to work on.
Right.
So you can do a maintenance type FMEA on those selected equipment items, but you don't go down to root cause the way you would on a design FMEA. Because in a design FMEA, you go to root cause so you can improve the design. But on maintenance, you want to get to the level of maintenance actionable.
Right.
And because you might be swapping out parts, and you're not necessarily going to be, in fact, you most likely aren't going to be fixing the design.
Well, that brings up the question, though. In that process, is there a point where you cross the threshold saying, we got to scrap this and buy a new piece of equipment?
Yes.
You know.
Yes. Yeah, that's. And when you're doing the FMEA, now, of course, the FMEA that supports maintenance, there's different logic. So I would encourage listeners to understand the differences. It's not a traditional FMEA. You're going to be doing certain logic diagrams to see what the risk is. But once you understand the risk and then what it would take to maintain the equipment, then the call them recommended actions or the follow-ups are going to be like a trade-off. And it's that point where you're going to say, okay, we're expecting this number of problems or failure occurrence on the equipment,
mm-hmm.
and with this level of severity. And then one of the solutions might be you're just going to start over on the equipment. Now, that's not an easy solution to make because that takes time.
Well, so does, breaking down regularly and being offline for a couple hours every day. That
That's
adds
right.
up pretty quickly too. Another question I got on this is that, you mentioned that they've been working on this for about a year and they're looking at how do we break through on this and would a PFMEA work? Imagine if they asked that question when they first opened the doors to the factory. Oh, this stuff's, mothballed and we need to bring it back up to life. Let's turn the power on and see what happens. And they have no experience. They have some experience with the process or the equipment. They have a few hands-on that, know about this equipment. So they're not completely blind, but they don't know the history. They don't know its storage conditions. They don't know. It's almost fruitless to do an FMEA at that point.
Yeah, the FMEA I was talking about is a process FMEA where we're actually building the product. You're using the equipment to build the product.
Right.
A different type of FMEA is an FMEA on the equipment itself.
Right.
And now, so which one were you talking about?
Well, on the equipment itself.
Okay.
Either one. I think when you first open the doors and say, "Hey, we need to bring this factory back to life," there's a lot of unknowns. You're pretty blind. It's more, I'd say, before you do an FMEA, is you got to fire it up and see what starts and what doesn't start and what smokes and what doesn't. And
I would agree with you that particularly if you're going to do a maintenance FMEA, then you need to know whether if the equipment doesn't start at all, then
it's a different problem.
It's a different problem, exactly.
It reminds me of startups. It's like, no, we don't want to do an FMEA yet. We got to actually get one of our concepts to work. Well, okay, good point.
And of course, there's another aspect. Let's go to the process FMEA side. Now we're just talking about here's process step 1, step 2, step 3, and we're building a product and using equipment, using people. At that point, as input to the process FMEA, you want to understand what is most important about your product. Mm-hmm. I'll call them key product characteristics.
Right.
And that is essential input. So you don't just start with the PFMEA first meeting. You want to understand what the key product characteristics are. Some people call them significant product characteristics, because during the PFMEA process, you're going to convert them to significant or key process characteristics. Mm-hmm. And then all of those, and here's the key, in my opinion, all of those become input to the process control plan. And that's the document that's going to manage the plant and manage the processes. And here's where you're going to use techniques like statistical process control or other techniques to make sure your processes are in control and capable, but they come from the PFMEA. Some of them come from the product itself. And so that's kind of a soup to nuts when I was doing this answer to the person, that primarily a process FME focusing on the process steps, but linked to a process control plan with input from the product characteristics. And I haven't got time. It'll probably be answer part 2 is, oh, by the way, don't forget maintenance and the equipment. And then you can do like you say, once you've got the equipment to see whether it works or not, you can start doing a RCM procedure so you can develop your preventive maintenance plan.
Yeah, and it's a good distinction between the maintenance one and the PFMEA. The issue I have is that, if they've been doing this for a year and have been just, experiencing way too much downtime, it doesn't, the RCM side of the things, I think, needs as much or more attention. And the FMEA part is a critical part of it, but do you have the right equipment? Do you have the right kits? Do you have the right training available for your team? Are you detecting issues quickly enough before they, destroy a bunch of other things? It still includes that prioritization part, but it's where are the areas that give us the highest severity issues that we got to go solve. But then it's coupled with decent RC or root cause analysis type stuff. It's if you're running from one to another just to get the lineup, you're just going to keep repeating these downing events.
Exactly.
So I think it's one of those, in my mind, it reminds me of that commercial years ago where they were building the airplane while it was flying, kind of scenario.
Yeah. Or fixing the airplane problems in the air.
That's right. And do a sky hook to bring the new engine in place so you could swap it out for the maintenance cycle on it while it's flying. They can do anything in Hollywood, apparently. But the idea is that it's a necessary step to step back and say, hey, we need to focus and solve and put problems to bed properly, get them all the way out. And that's the cultural part that some factories you just never see. It's get the ops manager is like, get the lineup, let's run. We got numbers to make kind of thing. So I think the technique you use to prioritize and get sorted and everything else could be all for naught. You could go do a beautiful FMEA and have a control plan and have all this other stuff. But if the ops plan is you don't get on the line, you can't touch anything, we just keep it running, it's for naught.
Yeah, I'm supporting both tools. In other words, I like both. The answer is both. Now we can debate and they should debate what sequence do you focus on the maintenance side first, or do you focus on the process control first? But I would want to get to the place where you have both. What people need to move away from is the whack-a-mole, where you're just overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
You could imagine the longer you don't focus on prevention, and the longer you don't prioritize and improve, then the more the problems are going to overwhelm you. And so that's the thing, is how do you, when you're trying to ramp up, when you're trying to race to the finish line, how do you also take time to do RCM procedures, take time to do PFMEA while this whole thing is working? And that is that's the real world. So many clients over the years that didn't do the prevention side, but they're in production and they have to keep going. In other words, they can't stop production and just shut down for 2 months.
But that's not always true.
Mm-hmm.
I've run into a couple of clients that they're short on staff. We can't get the enough of the right people in here quick enough. They don't have unlimited budget to hire a whole consulting crew to come in and solve all these problems. So they just shut down. for 2
Mm-hmm.
weeks and say, we're not going to make these shipments. And, we're struggling to get anything out or a quality product out or whatever. I think it's part of the mindset of just because you said you're going to ship 100,000 and you're not making it, and doing what you're doing now is not working, your whack-a-mole kind of approach, having the management gumption to say, in order for us to make it long-term, we got to step back and get this right. And that takes guts because there's so many pressures to ship another unit, and that's not always the right solution.
I'm going to agree with you on this. So let me clarify what I'm saying. If products are going out the door that do not meet quality objectives, you can't do that.
Right.
That's where you have to shut down and stop. And many assembly lines have that pull cord that basically stops the line. And so you can't compromise the quality. What I was thinking of, and I probably didn't make it clear in talking about it, is where you have problems with certain equipment that is taking time and money, but you're still getting the quality product out.
Right.
You just have higher waste.
Right.
And that's the trade-off that you can, if you're just talking about waste and you want to minimize waste, you can, in parallel, while you're still going, you can work on a PFMEA or other things. If you are not able to ship a quality product, you got to stop.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's a point though that, and it's a balance. If I'm making commitments to say I'm going to ship X number of units at the end of the day, and then we're consistently not making that, well, don't make those commitments. One.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
If what you're doing is not profitable, you got to step back and say, I actually had that discussion with somebody in a production line. They were making this. It was for the auto industry, of course, and the auto industry representatives said you need to shave another nickel per unit off of the price of this, and now it was 4 cents. The payment they were willing to make was 4 cents less than the cost of the raw materials, not accounting any labor or anything else. Even putting it in a box was going to create a loss. And they said, well, you can make it up in volume. All right. So how do we lose 4 cents per unit and just make 1 million of them and still lose 4 cents per unit? Get better. I mean, how's that work?
Right.
And so they got out of the business. They gave it to somebody else. But it was just if you're losing money at some point, if this equipment and the breakdowns are happening frequent enough and you got idle staff and it shuts your line down and you're creating more waste and more scrap, at some point, it's just not tenable anymore. You got to do something different. And one is make sure you're not overcommitting. But two is at some point, you got to say, no, we need to stop and overhaul this piece of equipment and actually focus on it and get it right. But I think there's a financial connection there that the maintenance teams are trying to do what they can to get stuff up. They can step back and get improvements and focus, and they can, get faster at bringing equipment up, doing the root cause and solving problems all as you're going, only to some extent. At some point, especially with old equipment you don't have a lot of history on, and if it's taking you down on a regular basis, the reason I mention it is that too many teams focus on, well, we said we're going to ship 100 units and we're going to do it one way or the other, even if it's at a loss. Now, in some markets, you got to do that on occasion, but
right.
Bringing up a new plant and knowing that you're going into it with high expectations and a lot of unknowns, at some point you just got to step back and say, hey, we got to work on this.
Yeah. And so just to be as clear as we can about this, we're not going to ship anything that doesn't meet quality objectives, but you may decide from a business standpoint that you can operate for a certain amount of time at a loss because you're going to improve market share eventually, you're going to scale up, things like that. That would be a business decision. And the part that's kind of hitting me as we summarize this particular topic is the challenge when you haven't done, and I'm not talking about this specific scenario here, but in general, if you haven't done the right prevention activities first, like ideally, you've done RCM procedure and you have your plans in place before you're in production.
Right.
That would be ideal.
Right.
You understand your equipment. And ideally, you've done your design FMEAs, PFMEAs, process control plans as you're getting ready to launch. But in the real world, sometimes you haven't done that. So now how do you play catch up?
Right.
And there's no simple answer to that.
That's right.
It's not automatically one way or the other. It's going to be a business decision of things you've brought up, where you're going to have to talk about profits and loss. We're going to pull the cord whenever there's quality issues. We're not going to allow poor quality to get into the field or poor reliability, but all the rest is going to be a business decision. If I was to summarize it, I'd say the need is to prioritize. In other words, we don't have to do a large PFMEA and everything.
Right.
You can be very selective, at least when you start. You can say, let's hit the highest priority first and narrowly focus on that. And then keep focused around key characteristics, because all characteristics are not alike. And if you can identify which ones are most key, they go into the process control plan. And then the process control plan can guide your activities in the plant.
Yep.
So just a few summarizing thoughts.
Yeah. And if you got some thoughts on this, if you're listening to this, let us know. Head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. This sounds like I recorded it, doesn't it? I got to break it up a little bit. But you can leave us a message or a voice message at that URL, or you could find Carl or I, the other hosts of the show, on LinkedIn or on our About pages at Accendo. Plenty of ways for you to get in touch with us. And as Carl's finding out, he gets plenty of questions through the Ask Carl a Question, which I think we're going to come back and catch up with some of those. So there's a tidbit for the next episode. So anyway, thanks, Carl, and hope it works out with this guy and their plant, and hopefully it's not anything I'm buying tomorrow, but.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Good conversation.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.